Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Thursday, October the 20th, and welcome to our commentary. Well, I guess the big story this morning out of the UK, out of London, is that Britain, Great Britain, England, the UK, is going to have a new prime minister. Liz Strauss, I think that's how you pronounce her last name. She's out 45 days. I caught just a little bit of the BBC about an hour ago, and they were saying something very interesting. They were saying this is the shortest time that anybody has ever been prime minister, 45 days. So she'll become, I guess, a great trivia question because of that. The next time you hear who was the prime minister who was in office the shortest time, I guess it would have been Liz Truss. That's the answer, Liz Truss in 2022. And then somebody was raising the possibility that for the first time in the history of the UK, there will be three prime ministers within 6 months. Boris Johnson, of course, who resigned, Liz Truss, who took over, and whoever the next one is. And it could very well be Boris Johnson, from what I was listening to on that BBC special that I was listening to. He may just come back. I guess it all depends on the Conservative Party. They have the majority, so whoever they nominate will become the prime minister. But I think, again, not being knowledgeable on UK politics, but just from a distance, it seems to me that Liz Truss made one very big mistake, and that is she came in a hurry. She came in. Thank you, Eric. Good to see you. She came in a hurry. She had very high expectations. I mean, there were people like Hugh Hewitt, who I follow here in the U.S., who are very high on Liz Truss. Or the guys over at Powerline, I check their blog every day, and they were very high on Liz Truss. They thought she would be the next Margaret Thatcher, and a lot of people were hoping for that. But she made one big mistake, I think, and this is the way history will remember her. She put forward an economic proposal that was pretty radical. Radical in the sense that it was it was conservative, but it was radical. It was exactly what the UK needed. You got to cut taxes. You got to make the UK more attractive for business. It was the kind of proposal I think many of us would support. But then she took it back, or as soon as she met any opposition to it, she took it back. And that's something that Margaret Thatcher would have never done. Margaret Thatcher would have done the exact opposite. She would have put it on the table and fought for it, and she would have tried to persuade you to accept it. So we don't know who the next prime minister of the UK is going to be, and that's important. It's important for us because the UK is the biggest ally of the United States. And frankly, when you're talking about NATO, it's the US and the UK and everybody else. So we better have a good, strong prime minister in the UK, because that's important for us as a military and political and diplomatic ally. So we wish the outgoing prime minister the best. Over there, they do it pretty quickly. It's you resign and you're gone like in a matter of days. So I guess that's the way it's gonna go. So I don't know who it's gonna be, but if it's Boris Johnson, let me put it to you this way: if they go back to Boris Johnson, I don't have a problem with that. Boris Johnson was a bit of a character, but I think most people that I was following thought he was doing a pretty good job as prime minister. So we wish our friends in the UK a little tranquility as they're going through this little political storm right now. Let's talk about the U.S. I have a post over at the American Thinker today talking about Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, and his latest Fantasyland speech, where he was talking about abortion and all of that. And I call it, the name of the post is Joe in Wonderland. And you can see it over at the American Thinker. It's on the right-hand side of where they line up the post. And my argument is that Joe Biden is talking about abortion because that's all he has. That's all. There's nothing else for them to talk about. They're underwater in every other measurement. Abortion is the only one where they have a little support. And he's talking about abortion as a distraction. I also think they're trying to gin up their base because all of the polling data coming out here in the last week or so shows the beginning of what could be a red tsunami. I mean, it could be more than a wave. It could be a tsunami, 40 or 50 seats in the House, maybe 2 or 3 in the Senate. So it's starting to look like it's going to be a very good night for the GOP. And the Democrats are trying to do whatever they can to hold that back. And talking about abortion, they believe, is one of the ways they're going to do it. I'm not sure it's going to work because I just don't think abortion is the kind of issue that moves people, especially when you have a very bad economy. There is always somebody who's going to vote on that basis. But I think for the most part, with the economy and all the problems right now, that's going to be the leading issue. But Joe Biden is living in Wonderland. And that leads me to my next topic. And that is President Biden, once again, tapping our national reserve to put oil into our system. First of all, that's like the guy who taps into his retirement account to go on vacation. That's kind of what this is. I'm going to go IRA and I'm going to pull money out of my IRA or retirement plan or whatever, and I'm going to take that for a vacation. Well, that would be pretty irresponsible, wouldn't it, if somebody did that? Well, that's exactly what this is. There's a reason we call this our security reserve, and that is for that moment when we may have to tap this reserve in case of a true emergency, not because his political polls are dropping, but because there's a real emergency. So this is highly irresponsible on the part of President Biden to do this. But we need to be doing, I just saw a statistic that we've got like 200 years of oil on the ground right here in the United States. That's what we should be tapping. That's what we should be drilling for. That's what we should be looking for oil and keep all that money in the United States, whether it's Texas or Alaska or fracking, wherever it may be. My goodness, why are we even wasting our time looking for oil somewhere else when we've got so much of it right here? But I don't know. He's surrounded by all these climate change people who I guess it's okay for Venezuela to drill for oil. I guess that doesn't impact the climate. Or the Arab countries to drill for oil. I guess that doesn't impact the climate. But if we do it, that impacts the climate. I don't know. I've never understood that argument. If you can figure that out, let me know. But it seems to me it's oil, and if it's going up into the sky, it's the same oil, wherever it comes from, wherever you drill for it. But, I think what's happening is he's surrounded by a bunch of people who made all these decisions for him, and they don't know how to get out of it right now. It's just the same thing with the border. They have no idea of how to get out of the mess that they've put themselves in. And all they do is they blame the oil companies, they blame this or they blame that. But on the first Tuesday of November, we're going to get to say something about it. And it looks like we're not very happy with what's going on in the country. All the polls are showing that. And I certainly hope that's the case, because this group needs they need to get hit between the eyes with a tsunami. They need to lose a lot of seats, and they need to be told, we're not happy with what you're doing. We're not happy with what you're doing, and we're going to show you how unhappy we are by blowing you out of the water on Election Day. Interesting story. There's an article by Professor Victor Davis Hanson, one of my favorite writers, authors, pretty intelligent guy. If you ever have a chance to listen to him, he's one of the most intelligent people in the country. And he has an article about election deniers. That's become very popular now. To anybody who criticizes the 2020 election is an election denier. But as Professor Hanson points out, we've had election deniers for a long time. Now, I'm old enough to remember when people were denying President Bush, 2000 and 2004. I'm old enough to remember when they didn't want to count the votes for President Bush in 2004, the Electoral College votes, because they didn't think it was legitimate. I'm old enough to remember when they did it to President Trump. My gosh, we spent 3 years investigating this nonsense about the Russians and the 2016 election. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when like 40 Democrats didn't go to President Trump's inauguration because they didn't think he was legitimate. So this stuff about election denying is something that we've had for some time. And I gotta say something on, I really want to congratulate the woman who's running for governor in Arizona, Kari Lake. I think that's her name. And she just hit the media so hard on this the other day when she was being asked about her concerns about the 2020 election. And she pulls out all these newspaper articles about Hillary Clinton denying the election and this guy denying the election. And she went through this whole list of deniers, election deniers. And then she was on CNN recently. I saw that clip. And she said to the lady who was interviewing her on CNN, she said, well, have you ever called Stacey Abrams an election denier? Well, if there is an election denier in the country, it's this lady from Georgia, Stacey Abrams. I mean, she spent 2 or 3 years saying that she had won the election. Nobody ever called her an election denier. So, look, one thing I like about our side, when we fight back, I think that's a good thing. And this lady, Kari Lake, who's running for governor in Arizona, it looks like she's going to win, but you never know until the votes are counted out there. But I like her style. I like the way she fights back, because that's what you got to do. When they start giving you this crap about election denier, you got to fight back and say, hey, wait a minute. What about when you guys did it? Nobody said you were a threat to democracy when you were challenging the election. So I like that. I like that Kari Lake in Arizona. And I love Professor Hanson for reminding us about election deniers in the past. And there are quite a few, believe me, quite a few. Hillary Clinton, quite a few of them, even Joe Biden was saying something about the elections in the past. So election deniers, there's a lot of them on the other side. So when somebody attacks you for questioning the election, hey, fight back and point out that they did it too. They do it too. And there's nothing wrong. You have the right as a citizen to question an election. You have the right to do so. Now, you may be right, you may be wrong, but you've got the right to question an election. The idea that only one side can question the election but not the other, that's crazy. And we need to fight back when they come at us with those kinds of things. Well, I got to leave you today with a little moment in history. It was on this day in 1973. Now, that's a long time ago. That would be, 49 years ago? That something called the Saturday Night Massacre happened. Now, there was no shooting. Nobody was killed. It was just called the Saturday Night Massacre because it happened on a Saturday night. And that was the night that President Nixon instructed the Attorney General to fire the Watergate prosecutor. He didn't want to do it, so he quit. Then he went to the next guy. He didn't want to do it, so he quit. So they were both fired. And then Robert Bork, who at the time was, I think, number 3 or number 4 in the Department of Justice, he did it. He fired the he fired on behalf of the president, and he became, I think, the acting Attorney General. Now, of course, Robert Bork is a name that we heard a few years later because he was nominated to the Supreme Court by President Reagan. And a lot of Democrats got even with Robert Bork when he was nominated by President Reagan. But it was called the Saturday Night Massacre. That's when you hear about it, that's what they call it. But again, nobody was killed. Nobody was shot. In fact, when you look at it now, 49 years later, it was a pretty insignificant thing because President Nixon had the constitutional right and authority to fire the prosecutor if he wanted to. Now, I wish he hadn't done it because all he did was, give the other side something to call the Saturday Night Massacre. But he had every right to do it. And there was no question that there was some partisanship coming out of that prosecutor's office. There's no question about that. But anyway, they call it the Saturday Night Massacre. Nobody got killed. Nobody got shot. There were no guns, no bullets. Just a lot of media hype. That's all that it was. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your comments. And we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.